So I really like vintage clothing and Halloween, and every year I try to make something new for the spooky season. Well, this year I decided I was going to try and make a felt skirt, kind of like a poodle skirt, but creepy. So I had a lot of ideas for what I could do to decorate this skirt with, and I'm going to go ahead and show you kind of what my idea for this project is. So it all starts with a plain black circle skirt made from felt, but when it comes to the appliques on it, I originally wanted pumpkins. After a bit of research, I came across this image in particular, and I realized it was basically what I was trying to accomplish, but it gave me the idea to add rickrack at the bottom. The other idea I had was to create patches of classic monsters heads to put around the bottom. This was something I thought would be cute to wear to like a Halloween horror night sometime in the future if it pans out. Those were the two I decided on, but I also consider things like bats, or spiders, or a spooky townscape, and dancing skeletons. The possibilities are endless, but with the two I've decided to settle on, let's just go ahead and get right into the sewing. The first step was to gather the supplies. I usually do this at Joann's. When making a felt skirt, the two popular choices of fabric are either wool felt or regular polyester felt. There are several differences between the two, first being that polyester felt comes in 72-inch width bolts, while wool felt only comes on 36-inch wide bolts, half the size, meaning you need more yards of the wool felt for the same project. The other difference is in quality. It may be hard to see on camera here, but the polyester felt is noticeably thinner than the wool felt. You can just slightly see my fingers through it. The wool felt, however, has tighter packed fibers, which makes it feel smoother and heavier. The heaviness of it gives a nice effect to the drape of the skirt I'll be making. There's also a faint sheen to the wool felt that I personally think looks very pretty. All these differences add up to a hefty price difference though. The polyester felt is only about $7 a yard, while the wool felt is about twice the price at $13 a yard. You can honestly use whichever you prefer and get a good result. However, I'm choosing to go with the wool felt for this project because I can, and I have a sick-ass coupon. Once the fabric is acquired, I can start cutting it out. This is going to be a plain circle skirt, which is fairly simple. You only need two measurements from yourself, the hem and your waist. There's multiple websites to help calculate all the measurements you need to make your own skirt, which I've linked in the description. But there's also a couple different patterns out there you can use. My favorite is the Stanwig skirt from Charm Patterns. Here's the pattern I'm working off and the measurements I'm using. Here I'm marking with pins the length of the hem and the waist with the fabric folded in half. Once everything is marked, I just cut the circle out as well as the inner circle for the waist. After that, I have a half of a full circle cut out. I can now use this piece as a guide for cutting out the second piece. Laying it on top of the remaining fabric and cutting around. Once I have two pieces, I'm going to cut one of them in half down the middle like so. This will be for the zipper. After cutting everything, I now have these three pieces, which when laid out together make a full circle. Now to start sewing them together. Sew the front and back pieces together by the side seams. I'm using a straight stitch on my machine set to a medium length. Once the sides are sewn, you can actually test the fit on yourself by pinning the open back side around your waist. I use this to make sure everything is sitting correctly before continuing on, especially if it needs to be taken in more. Now for everyone's favorite part, pressing those seams! I'm using an iron to press both the seams I just made completely flat so it looks nice and smooth from the outside. Moving on to the waistband. I prefer to make my waistband straight, so here I'm cutting out a rectangular piece that is 3 inches wide and the same length of my waist measurement with about an inch of seam allowance added to it. I'm then cutting out a second one to have a back and front side. On one of the sides, I'm ironing a piece of interfacing roughly the same size, but about a ½ inch shorter in length. For the wool felt, this may not be necessary as it's already kinda stiff, but if you're using the polyester felt instead, I highly recommend it. It'll keep the waistband from collapsing and wrinkling in on itself as you wear it. Next, I'm going to sew the two waistband pieces together. placing them right sides together and sewing a straight stitch along one side. This will be the top of the waistband. And once they're sewn together, I'll fold the band in half and press everything flat. Now we can attach the waistband to the skirt. I'm pinning the interface side to the waist of the skirt, and we'll be sewing these together with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After sewing, I'll break out the iron again to press the seam I just made up towards the top of the skirt. In order to help everything lay as smooth as possible, I'm going to cut down the inner part of the seam allowance, leaving the skirt edge untouched. The next step is to prepare for the zipper. I've sewn the back edge of the skirt together from the bottom, leaving a 9-inch opening at the top. I'm then going to take a 9-inch zipper to sew in. I apologize for this part here. I put in a lap zipper into the skirt, however as I tried filming the process, it was near impossible to see what was going on. A disadvantage of the black on black. I recommend looking up tutorials on lap zippers as they'd be far better at describing what to do than I would here. Once the zipper's in place, we have to shift into manual sewing now. I'm going to be closing up the waistband by hand stitching it down on the inside. Fold the waistband in half using that top seam as a guide. Then pin them together so that everything sits still for the next steps. This is a bit hard to see around my sausage fingers, but I'm folding a small 1/4 inch length of the internal waistband under where it's sitting right on top of that inner seam. I'm then going to hand sew it down by catching the inner seam and coming up through the end of the waistband. This is just a quick whip stitch, but there are others you could do if you'd like it to be neater. No one will be seeing this, and I'm not too picky on this project about this part. I'm also going to carry on doing this up the sides of the skirt around the zipper's edge. Once everything is sewn down, the base skirt is finally finished. Now we can do the actual fun part, making all the patches. I'm starting with a pumpkin design first. I've marked out a design on 2 shades of orange felt, which I'm going to cut out and layer on top of each other to create a basic pumpkin shape. I started off gluing all my felt pieces with some tacky glue because I figured it'd be the most weather resistant. However, it takes an especially long time to dry and is very slippery before it's cured, so I quickly gave up on that and later just used the hot glue gun for the sake of convenience. I made about 12 pumpkins and then moved on to making stems and different faces for them, which I neglected to film unfortunately, so here they are when they're already done. Before I attach the pumpkins, I'm going to sew on that orange rickrack I mentioned earlier, about 1.5 inches from the hem. This is going to help me make sure the pumpkins are evenly spaced from the bottom. In order to attach them, I wanted to go with hand stitching around the borders with some embroidery thread. This reminds me a lot of vintage tree skirts and even homemade holiday sweaters. It might not be the neatest or the prettiest, but something about it makes me really happy and nostalgic. I also stitched around the stems in a similar green thread. Felt is fairly easy to work with, but it attracts cat hair in all forms of dirt like no other. I promise I did everything to try and clean these skirts, but I went through a full lint roller during this project. The classic Munster skirt was a bit more complicated. I designed up 6 busts to use for the patches. Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Bride of Frankenstein, Frankenstein's Munster, Dracula, the Wolf Man, and the Invisible Man. I had a couple copies printed out of each, and I'm going to use them as templates. I ended up getting a lot of felt squares. Like a lot. I was fortunately able to get most of the colors I needed, except for the ones for the creature. They only had 1 shade of olive colored felt, so I had to paint different shades on his layers to create depth. I cut out the busts piece by piece and then marked those out on the felt, slowly layering them up. This entire process took about 6 hours of time over the course of several nights, but I eventually had all 6 finished. I didn't think the felt alone helped with the depth of them, so I took some black fabric paint and used it to trace around the edges a bit. This way the details would stand out a bit more. Also, because the base of the skirt is black, I had to take a few of the busts that had black felt as well and back them with a small trim of gray felt so that they wouldn't get lost. Then I was able to stitch them on like I did with the pumpkins, this time using a black thread. Once I was stitching them on, I realized I should have probably done this same thing for the stitches on the bride and the monster instead of drawing it on with the puffy paint. Just a lapse in judgment, I guess. But finally, with all that done, the skirts are finished. I think the project went okay. I really like how the pumpkins one came out, but I'm on the fence about the classic monsters one. The main reason for it is that since the heads are a bit small, they kind of get lost in the pleats as I move around. I had to try pretty hard in the photos and videos just to get all the heads in view. I'm pretty positive it's just a scaling issue, so that would be easy to fix to just replace them later. I would still wear it to like a Halloween Horror Nights or something like that if I ever get to go again. Also, this is my favorite pumpkin. I hope this video was bearable. It's been a really long time since I've tried filming my crafting activities, so I'm a bit rusty. But I'd really like to keep doing it. I already have a couple of videos in progress for the next few months. Ow! Stop! So if you like vintage clothing and spooky aesthetic and even cosplay, you might enjoy sticking around. Anyways, thank you for watching. Yeah. Bye.